protest overuse, or the question of, are we overusing protests? Now we have many protests going on around the world. The major one is in Hong Kong. We have in Russia all the time, on and off, Turkey. Chile recently got into the map too, and a few other countries. You have major protests. Some of them turn violent, more than the rest. The question I would like to pose is, are we overusing protests? Are we becoming numb to protests? The more we use protests, the more we're engaging in it, the more the public see protests, the less valuable they become, or the less likely protests are to move public perception. We must have public perception. Because public perception changes everything. The whole reason we protest is to change the public opinion about some matters. And when there is overuse of this, the fear is that people becoming numb to it. And when people becoming numb to it, the politicians has no incentive to listen to the public. The whole idea is to protest, to change politicians' view. The only way to change the politicians' view on the matter, or to actually go and do something else, is by changing the public perception of something. By overusing it, we might do, or the result might be counterproductive. Of course, this is not to say that protests are not important. They are extremely important in order to change some things or some bad things within the country. That's the only way the public or the population, the average citizen, have the power or the call to change something, except of voting. And that's only in democratic countries. Therefore, the only way to actually change something is through protests. So I'm not trying to say that this is not important. What I'm trying to say is, or at least ask the question, whether there is an overuse of it, whether it's better to do it less often. For example, we have Hong Kong protests, rather than every week, for example, to have like a smaller amount of people, get a bigger crowd every month or something like that. Maybe we should think of more, how do we want to construct this protest movement? Do we do it too often? How's the public see that? Do politicians really change their mind? So this is some of the questions we have to ask ourselves, because otherwise they're going to lose their power. And when they're going to lose their power, when something that really needs a change, first of all, the government would have, this is just another protest, everyone got used to it. Therefore, the citizens might lose this power of protests. Now, especially when protests become violent, that's even more counterproductive, because then the government has more power or more wiggle room to say this is wrong. But this is a different subject. Protests have to be made to make a stance. When they become a routine, I would argue that it might make everyone numb to protests, and the result might be counterproductive for the general idea. And again, I would like to say that I do think protests are extremely important, but we need to figure out the right way to do that without causing extreme changes. We need protests when something extremely happens. And some of the protests are on, I wouldn't say it's minor things, but they are important, but they're disproportionate to what the population is asking for. If there is a rise in public transportation prices, does that justify violence and other things? We need to figure out what is the right formula here. That's the idea here. Thank you.